how happy I am to be here with all of you, and especially happy to be with my friend and colleague, as I always describe her, Sylvia Boorstein. And I'm going to turn it over to her to begin.
I always think, first of all, I'm thrilled to see you all, and it'll work out with the internet. I think the first noble truth is things happen. We'll talk about that. But I often think that the first minutes of waiting to be on a Zoom where we can see everybody who's there are already a lesson in the truth that when we look at people coming on, that's already practice. We say, oh, there's so and so. Oh, there's so and so. And then you see somebody that you know, and your heart picks up, oh, there's so and so. And maybe you see somebody who you don't know before at all, and you say, oh, I don't know that person. Well, okay. And maybe, oh, this is what we'll be teaching about somewhat today. You see someone, you think, ah, I'm not crazy about that person. But you don't think about that. You see everybody, and that person becomes, if there's such a person, it becomes subsumed in, here are all these people. I know them. There are people that I already know or people that I'm hoping to get to know. And that if I'm attentive to that, that I notice that as people are logging on, oh, there's so-and-so, there's so-and-so, there's so-and-so. And in every moment, as we lead through the today, this is like stopping in the middle of a sentence, I'll come back to the end of it. Through today, we will have periods of contemplative practice that involve the four foundations of mindfulness. And it's a wonderful experience in the foundation of mindfulness where you realize pleasant, not so pleasant, oh, interesting, but I don't know, but not pleasant, that because you watch and you think, oh, good, oh, this, oh, that, oh, that. And you watch how the mind, moment to moment with new experience, is feeding back information. I like this, I don't like this is thrilling, this is that. There isn't a moment that isn't practice. And that's really, oh, good, I'm fixing it so I'm looking at all of you and not me. Okay, because that's the best for me. And I'm thrilled that we're doing this. I told Sharon I have a new story that I want to tell. And I'll tell you the punchline of the story is that another name for whatever we want to call this meeting today is notice, pay attention, and pass it on. I think that's the in like 4 words or 5 or however it was. So here's a story I want to tell you. I went for a walk recently along a particular walk that I like to walk on that goes along a creek. And sometimes the creek is in the drought, the creek didn't have very much water in it, but the creek is connected to the bay, is connected to the ocean. So it always has enough water in it to have a certain amount of waterfowl in it. And I was walking along that path a week or so ago, and I don't know what I was thinking about or feeling. I'm walking along, and then my attention notices in the creek that I'm looking at, there's a mother duck floating along, and I can see there's several man ducks around her, drakes. But here's this mother duck, and she's got behind her a line of tiny, looks like just born, just hatched baby ducks. And they line up in a line, and they follow their mother. And they were barely visible. I was walking along and I see them just, across the roadway and down in the creek. And here's this mother duck, and she's going along. And you have to really look because these baby ducks are tiny. And they're all lined up. And every once in a while, she breaks out and comes back around the end as if she's lining them up. I thought to myself, ducks count. It looks like she's going back to line them all up. Like quail march around like that. New hatched quails are going to line behind their mother. So here's this duck going along, comes around as if she's counting to make sure everybody's there. I think to myself, ducks count. They're not even mammals. But anyway, but I was so thrilled by this. And there are several drakes floating around. I thought, I wonder whose babies these are. Maybe they're not. Maybe it's just a squadron of helpers. Who knows? But I looked at that and I thought to myself, it's so amazing, life. Look at that. Look at these teeny weeny baby ducks. It was a thrilling moment. I thought, look at that. It's one of those moments that you think it lifts you out of your particular life, what's ever going on and your problem and your this and that, from my life is this and this and this, to life is amazing. And it makes you feel very good and connected to all of that. And life, all of a sudden, it's really wonderful to be alive. Look at that. And the first thing I did after I was amazed and thrilled is I looked around and I saw a person coming along this path that I'm walking on towards me. And I say, hey, look at this. And I point out to her this duck and the baby ducks behind. It was all I don't know who it was, but I said, look at this. And then afterwards I thought, I wonder what she thought about me. Maybe that was weird to do. But I thought that that's the motivation that arises in people when their mind is lifted up into a place of life is ultimately amazing. Not my life. My life has ups and downs and wonderful and not so wonderful and worrisome things and not so worrisome things and delightful things. But life itself is amazing. So to have the ability to be able to look around and say, wow, life is fantastic. And it lifts you out of my life has this or that. My life has this or that problem, but life itself is amazing. And it so lifts up your heart. What I took away from that experience was there's an impulse to pass it on, tell somebody else. Like if we could all email the whole world and say, hey, everybody, we've all got problems, right? But life itself is amazing. And to be a part of it unfolding is amazing. I hope that was as thrilling to you as a story. I told Sharon I have a new story. Was that a thrilling story, Sharon? What? Okay, so I thrilled myself by telling you. Now I forgot what we're going to do yet. Okay. I'm telling, so it says I told the story of the okay. I told the story about the woman, and I thought to myself, that's the clue that if I were doing this as a Dharma talk, I would call it pay attention, see what's true, and pass it on, because I think that what happens with us. And now my beloved friend and colleague and teacher, Sharon.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We had a lot of fun imagining this day, and now it's real. And so we'll just share all our creative imaginations. I am really grateful. There are a lot of ways of spending a day. The sky's not yellow anymore here in New York City. I'm fascinated to see the range of where you're all signing in from. And having been a big traveler, although not anymore, there's so many resonances as I read these different places. I think, oh, I've been there. I taught nearby. Or Sylvia and I had a memory. Sylvia, there are a number of people signing in from New Mexico, and so I thought of some of the many retreats we taught together in New Mexico and how there were no bathrooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we were already women of a certain age, so it was challenging.
I forgot that part of it.
Wow. That's a good selective memory, I'd say. But it's delightful, that you all have made this kind of effort and you have this intentionality. And we get to be here together in dialogue, in examination, exploration, and practicing together. So one of the things in the description of the day is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And so we want to be sure to very explicitly cover that, both in conversation and in practice. Basically, the idea is that in terms of formal practice, let's say you are sitting, could be walking, could be lying down, it could be really any posture, but a dedicated period where your intention is to deepen awareness, balance, connection, clarity, and so on. Let's say it's sitting, you're not sitting down to also figure out your strategic plan for your organization or your vacation plan or your new bathroom that you're going to build. I mean, certainly that may come up, but that's not the purpose. That's not the intention behind this little period. So in this period, we're deepening awareness, et cetera, and all those good qualities that come along with mindfulness. And there are ways of, for that dedicated period, parceling it out so that within that, there's a specific focus, like the body, practicing mindfulness of the body or the breath or the thoughts or whatever. And that's what we're going to use as kind of a framework for that sort of description and examination. There's also ways of practicing in those dedicated periods that are much vaster, much more open. And so, for example, I did significant periods of meditation training in Burma, and I didn't ever go, but I heard about a monastery where the instruction was basically within the first 30 seconds that you arrived. And that was be aware of anything, be aware of everything. So I never got there, like the people I studied with tended to be more kind of sequential and systematic. Like first we're going to do this, then we're going to build on that, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to add that. And then, so that was my own personal experience. And I don't know how I would have done with be aware of everything, because I wasn't aware of anything. And I know as a writer, for example, my great weakness is structure. I always rely on having someone helping me create a structure. And the single most common comment editorially I've ever gotten was, how'd you go from here to there? I don't know. I just went, so be aware of everything. I don't know what that means, like, all right, I'm already aware. Whereas I rely on that more sequential pattern, but it doesn't have to be that way. There are many, many ways of practicing within that kind of dedicated period. And then, of course, there's the rest of one's life. And that's a good deal of what today is about, is really not just thinking of practice as those little dedicated periods that appear now and then, but really is all of one's life and activity and rest and movement and everything that we do. And so we're going to certainly go into that. For the dedicated periods, we will tend to work with a particular emphasis. Okay, so the first one, generally speaking, and this is very common because it's also a vehicle for bringing practice into an ordinary day, is awareness of the body in some way, very commonly with the feeling of the breath. I'm told by people since the beginning of COVID that is often difficult for a lot of people, the feeling of the breath as a primary object. Many practice periods start with a primary object, and that is a home base. You don't have to have a home base. You could be aware of everything or anything that comes up, and that is resonant with a lot of people. If you're going to have a more structured practice, you likely have a home base. And that means a place to rest our attention, not with a tight, exclusive hold, but really that sense of a home base. Okay, now I'm at rest. I'm not trying to manipulate or strategize or change. I can simply be with this object of awareness. And in the beginning, we're really focusing more on the factor of concentration than anything. And that is based on the belief that for a lot of us, our attention's pretty scattered. We're kind of distracted. We're all over the place. And you don't need to be an experienced meditator to know that. You sit down to think something through and you're gone. You're way gone, right? You didn't work out that dilemma after all. You did find your whole vacation, whatever it might be. So in the very beginning, often the goal is twofold. One is to explore that quality of rest on the primary object. So let's say it's the feeling of the breath. Many people believe that if they grab a hold tightly to the breath, their minds won't wander and they'll really wander more. So that in itself is a kind of skill to learn just to be with, to rest. I remember in my earliest practice, I was so hyper vigilant. Like, this was, by the way, the very first meditation instruction I ever received was sit down and feel your breath. And first of all, I had such performance anxiety. It's like I'd never taken a breath before. And it was very difficult for me to just be with this breath, because almost as soon as this breath began, I'd find myself like mentally leaning forward to get ready for the next 50. And that was actually a mental posture I had anyway. You know, I was very frightened. I was very wary. I don't know what might happen next. Felt like I had to be ready for it. So I used to say to myself, settle back. Let the breath come to you. And I'd say to myself, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. You don't have to like worry about doing it right. Just settle back. Let the breath come to you. So we often intuit when we're out of balance in some way. And the adjustment, we just do that. Okay, settle back. Simply be with. We learn how to rest. We learn that our attention won't stay there, and that's normal. That's just the way we're conditioned. We learn how to let go gently and return in an act of building resilience and learning how to more skillfully begin again. We learn sensitivity and awareness of what's happening in our bodies, beginning with the breath and moving on to just a greater sensitivity to sensation as sensation, because that, of all things, is going to be the most concrete thing we can have as a basis for awareness, walking from room to room at work, if we leave the home to work, or even at home, commuting, you know, sitting on a subway somewhere, walking down the street, reaching for a cup of tea, feeling the warmth of the teacup. So many things we experience are more subtle, they're vaguer, but here we are. This is how we can ground in any moment in life, here we can connect. There's something also about sensation, feeling the body, which brings us directly to the world of constant change. It's like, if I lifted up this cup and you asked me what I was feeling and I said the cup, everyone would be kind of pleased with that, you know, like, because that's what we call it. That's conventional consensual reality. If I lifted this up and you asked me what I was feeling and I said the iPhone, everyone would worry about me a lot, right? Because that's not what we've agreed to call it. But there's also a certain stagnation there. Like, I call it a cup yesterday, call it a cup today, I'll call it a cup tomorrow. Whereas if I lifted this up and you said, what are you feeling? And I said, warmth, pulsing, throbbing. That's the world of constant change. And so it's it's even almost like a shortcut to enter that world of greater aliveness and movement and flow. So we rely on awareness of the body, of sensations quite a lot. When we feel lost in space, you know, we just have to take a breath or feel our feet against the ground. And this honestly is the kind of instruction that I'd first hear, because it was very early on in my practice. And I was very dismissive of it. I thought, that is so stupid. You know, like nobody had a job and we're all living in India. But, you know, if somebody said, how do I stay mindful, you know, or how do I practice mindfulness on my way into town to get a cup of chai, which is sort of the most activity we ever did. And the teacher would say, feel your feet against the ground. I think, so stupid. You know, it's like too simple. It's not elaborate enough. It's not fancy enough. It's not spiritual enough. It's not esoteric enough, but you know what? It works. And so this is what we see. It's like, it's not a long journey. It's like, here I am. I'm back. That's why sometimes in meetings and things like that, I know Sylvia's going to talk a whole lot more about this. You know, we say, take a minute just to breathe or something like that and feel the body. It's also one of the things we do, which we'll talk about a little later. It's very unusual in the world of emotion, or more usual in the world of emotion, is to get fascinated or even fixated on the object, the incident, the story. It's like if you, this makes no sense to the people in New York, but maybe more sense to the people in New Mexico. If you really, really, really want a new car, you spend your time likely thinking about, do I want that kind of upholstery, that kind of upholstery, what color, or how am I going to play music? It is very rare to kind of pivot one's attention around and to look almost as though to say, what does it feel like to want something so badly? What does it feel like to be angry? Not what am I angry about or what am I going to do about it, but what is anger? And the first place we look is the body, right? So there are many, many ways that awareness is going to serve us in a really comprehensive view of our lives. And for many, that will begin with the breath, not for everybody, and perhaps fewer even in this time. I'm going to guide it as though it were the breath, but you can substitute, you know, some sensation that is happening anyway, so you don't have to like struggle to find it. Your hands touching, or your hands touching your knee, or sometimes people use different touch points. They flash on their whole body, like sitting, and then different areas around the size of, say, a quarter, where you're already in contact. So again, it's not a struggle. So it might be like sitting, touch, 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 or even in, out with the breath, sitting, touch, 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 something like that, okay? So let's practice together. You can sit comfortably. See if your back can be straight without being strained or overarched. You can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. If your eyes are closed and you get really sleepy, it's totally fine to open your eyes and continue on. We can start actually by listening to sound, whether it's the sounds of my voice, my street, since I'm in New York, or other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside, allowing your experience to come and go. Unless you are responsible for responding to the sound, see if you can just wash through you. And bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. See if you can feel the earth supporting you. See if you can feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space. We think about picking up a finger and poking it in the air. But space is already touching us. It's always touching us. We just need to move into receptive mode and feel it. Bring your attention to your hands and see if you can move from that more conceptual level, let go fingers, to the world of direct sensation, coolness, warmth, pulsing, hardness, whatever you might be feeling. You don't need to name these things, but that's where we rest our attention. And on that same level, bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, just the normal, natural breath, the sensations of the breath. Wherever you feel the breath most distinctly, then maybe the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. You find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. The breath is happening anyway. All you need to do is feel it. And if the breath has not been working for you as an object, it's totally fine. Some other sensation already happening in your body. Let's say it is the breath. It's just this one breath. You don't have to be concerned with what's already gone by. You don't have to lean forward for even the very next breath. Just this one. If you like, you can use a very quiet mental notation like in, out, or rising, falling to help support the awareness of the breath, but very quiet. So your attention is going to feeling it, one breath at a time. if images or sights or sounds, emotions, sensations should arise, but they're not very strong. If you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. If they are strong and they pull you away, if you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. You can realize you've been gone. See if you can gently let go and simply come back. It's just one more breath. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you again. Welcome again. And I'm going to turn things over to Sylvia, who's going to describe that broader sense of practice off the cushion and then guide us in doing some of that.
You said one particular thing, Sharon, that I wrote down because where did I write it down? Uh, that I really loved. You said awareness of this world of constant change. And that would, I thought, that's the phrase that I need to use more and more, because really, jumping way to the end, when the Buddha was about to die, his penultimate statement is supposed to have been, everything that arises transient are all created things. This is going to pass. People learn that sometimes, or people say, this too shall pass, and often skipping over the empathic response to the person in whom whatever difficult thing has not yet passed is suffering, but we'll leave that for another time. But I want to talk a little bit about the connection with see the ducklings, be thrilled about being alive and pass it on to somebody else is really like the shorthand for whoever it is to be able to be in a moment of, wow, this is the world of constant change and it's very undependable. And in the most marvelous moments, who knows how long it's going to be there? And in the most terrible moments, who knows how long it's going to be? Somebody sent me an email this morning of lists of things that are true. and then one of the things which I think is untrue is every bad thing will get better. I thought, no, that's not true. Some bad things get worse. It's not true. Things keep changing, and not just for me, for everyone. So I want to go back a little bit to Sharon started practicing in India. I don't know, 5 years before. It was 1977 for me, Sharon. When did you go to India?
The parade outside my window. Just I went to India in 1970. I began January 1971.
Okay, and I began July 7th, 1977, 7777, which looks like a very good number on a slot machine. You win a lot of money from that. And I went on a retreat with Jack Cornfield and two other people who are no longer teaching anywhere that I know about. One of them passed out of this world, but it was a life-changing event, that whole experience. And I didn't leave after that. And I met Sharon in 1986 when she taught me metta. And this 50 years ago, 45, 50 years ago. And in those days, everybody was going to a meditation retreat about this or that or the other. And the zeitgeist was that it was like tripping. You'd be out of this world and you'd have unworldly experiences, and you might glow in the dark, or you might levitate off your pillow, or something extraordinarily non-normal would happen to you. And that seemed, nobody said that's the point, to have a far out experience. But coming on the heels of the 1960s, where people were doing all kinds of mind-changing plant substances to see in another way, I thought it was it was trippy. Somebody said, this is great. I loved sitting quietly on retreat. I didn't get what everybody was saying, but I couldn't, took me the longest time to think, don't tell me there's no me inside of me looking out these eyes and hearing in these ears. But I like to be on retreat, and I love my teachers, and they seem to have, all of them, something that I didn't have, which now I would think I'd like to call something like poise, or not even equanimity. I like poise as a better word than equanimity, because poise means enough equanimity to be able to say, okay, what do I do now? Because I think the whole of life from the beginning is, this is what's happening. What do I do now? When I meet people on retreat over the years, it was always hard for me to hear people to come on retreat and they say, I have to confess, I haven't practiced a minute in a year. And I want to say, we're practicing every minute of our life. We were practicing from when we were 3, but we didn't call it practice. We called it looking around and saying, uh-oh, what do I do now? We have a whole life of, uh-oh, what do I do now? And we often make impromptu decisions about what do I do now that don't make the now improved. But the whole thing is this moment, what's true and what can I do? One of my favorite teachers that I never met was Nyanaponika Thera. And there's in his book, which I always have near to me, The Heart of Buddhist Meditation, he talks about a quality of mind called clear comprehension of purpose. And I love that. He said, once you have a way of settling your mind down so you can see clearly, then what you have the ability of experiencing is clear comprehension of purpose. What should I do now? And the whole of life is, what should I do now? I've just gotten a terrible diagnosis. What should I do now? My best beloved is challenged. What should I do now? The skies are making impossible. The air is impossible to go out into. What should I do now? The planet is on fire. What should I do? What should I do now is what we decide every moment of every day. And what I am hoping to have cultivated is that my decision will not be impromptu, but based on Uh, this is later today, based on the instruction that every moment you think to yourself is what I'm going to do now for everyone's benefit as well as mine. And that really is the heart of practice. If someone had said, why don't you take up this practice, it's going to make you a kinder person, I would have said, kindness is not my problem. I'm a relatively kind person. I came from kind people and I had a kind upbringing. So I'm a kind person. I'm anxious, I'm worried, I'm nervous. I want to make that better. It got better, by the way. But kindness is not my problem. But here it is 50 years later, 45 years later, and I am kinder. And I'd like to be kinder still. I'd like to have my mind habituated, really habituated to natural response of kindness. So I would tell you some stories about how I began to think that I used to think actually on retreat, I go on a retreat and people would say, this is, practice is going to help you be mindful of everything and really be awake in your life. Okay. Then they'd say, now bring your attention to your breath. And I say, wait a minute, you just said everything. Now I'm back on the breath. And Sharon just gave such a good description of we're not equipped, we're not trained to pay attention to everything. We start with the breath and the body and the mind because we have to start incrementally. We have what is called in the text an untrained mind. We come with an untrained mind, and we're training it not to be just experiencing, but experiencing and really, I love what you said about the difference between this is a cup and this is warm and throbbing, and my mouth is salivating, and this is what's happening. What's happening in me in response to the sensations in my mind and body that are coming up one moment to the next. I got hints of that when I studied with Upandita. And Sharon had much more experience with him than I did, but I did have a retreat with him. And when he came on in for an interview, he would say, what is your clearest experience while you're sitting, doing the formal sitting practice? And what is your clearest practice when you're walking, doing the formal structured walking practice? And then he would say, what is your clearest understanding in the in-between times? And it sounded a little bit quaint to begin with, but then I thought that means all the other times, sitting and walking and standing and moving about and fixing lunch and talking on the telephone and getting lost because you passed your subway stop and you didn't know to get off. It means everything. What are you doing in all the in-between times? And I thought, well, that means it has to mean pay attention to everything all the time. And I mean, Sharon just explained so wonderfully that we're not trained to do that. So you don't go in the gym and pick up the biggest weights. You start with little ones and you work with them. And then you work up too. But we're not working up to levitating. We're working up to seeing clearly in order to have clear comprehension of purpose, in order to be poised, to be able to respond, in order to experience the pleasure of compassion. Because I thought that I hadn't thought it so clearly until yesterday, that I've been saying the pleasure of compassion means you really move out in your body or in your mind to console somebody else because you're moved by their difficulty. But I think there's a piece that comes back that I hadn't thought of psychologically, really, that when my mind reaches out to somebody out of in action or in thought or in prayer or whatever, that actually it comes back to me, that the feedback of that is connection to that person. And I was thinking is that the end game is that you're not alone, you're a part of this whole evolving story called life. And so I was thinking, I used to say that the point is compassion. The point is compassion because it connects us really to all beings. And we'll do some meditations on that later on this morning. But I thought, okay, now I really got it. I wonder, do you have this experience, Sharon, that sometimes, I mean, we've both been teaching a long time now. Sometimes I say the same thing that I've said, I don't know how many times, and then I just say it again. And I don't know why. I think to myself, I just really got that. Do you ever have that when you say something?
Yeah, I mean, I have it all the time, really. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I think it's a great feeling, like looking back and saying, oh, last month I thought, now I really understand that. And then I think, no,
Yeah.
not really.
Now
Now I understand that.
I understand because it's thrilling. I'm figuring I'll understand it better and better and better, I hope. And that, anyway, so I thought about that Upandita story. Didn't he say that was his instruction, wasn't it, Sharon?
Yeah, I mean, his instruction, Upandita was a Burmese meditation teacher, for those who don't recognize the name, who we brought to Barry, Mass, to the Insight Meditation Society for the first time in 1984, where he taught a 3-month retreat. And many of us, such as myself, many friends, sat under his guidance, never having met him before. And there were a number of things he was kind of known for, including being extremely fierce and intense and demanding. And we also worked with him individually, because we were seeing him, each of us saw him 6 days a week for a little private meeting, just to describe our practice and get some feedback. So there were a number of very interesting things about that process of communication. One was he wasn't interested in interpretation. He wanted to know what your experience actually was. And that was a whole discipline for any one of us. Like, if you walked in and said, I had a terrible morning, that meant nothing to him. What you had to say is, I sat down, I felt my breath, I forgot to note, then I fell asleep and I hit my head, and then and then he had data, then he had information. So that was interesting. And he also worked with each of us. This is the part in response to your question, Sylvia. He worked with us each very individually, but I had no way of knowing that because it was a silent retreat. And so for me, it was very much along the lines you're describing, Sylvia, where like we were supposed to describe one sitting practice and one walking practice from the previous 24 hours. So most of us took some notes just to say, I fell asleep, or, it was glorious or whatever. Not that, but, this is what happened. And this is how I experienced it. And we went through a whole long period, he and I together, because he had that habit too. It's a pedagogy really based on repetition. We went through a long, long period where before I could read my notes and describe one sitting and one walking session, he would say to me, tell me everything you noticed when you drank a cup of tea, which was nothing. So I'd leave and I'd sit and I'd walk and I'd drink tea as mindfully as I could. I'd feel the warmth of the teacup. I'd feel the lifting of my arm. I'd smell the tea. I'd taste the tea. I'd go in the next day before I could say anything. You say, tell me everything you noticed when you washed your face, which was nothing. So I left and I sat and I walked as mindfully as I could. And I drank tea as mindfully as I could in case he went back to that. And then when I washed my face, I'd feel my hands in the water and I'd feel the water on my face. And then I'd go the next day, and before I could say anything, he'd say, tell me everything you noticed when you took off your shoes, which was nothing. So I quickly saw where things were going. And in my mind, I called it the torment of continuity. But in reality, it was amazing because everything was practice. Nothing was more important than anything else. If I was drinking a cup of tea in the dining room and I got lost, really entangled in some fantasy, and then I realized it, I had to begin again right there, not like run to the dishwasher and throw my cup in and run to the meditation hall to kind of do the real thing. Everything was the real thing. And as a consequence of all of that, this went on for weeks and weeks. I slowed down a lot because every cup of tea, every time I stood up from a chair, but none of my friends were slowing down. And I was like watching like Joseph speed by me. And I think, why am I the only one listening to him? No one else is paying any attention. Because I didn't realize he was teaching everyone very individually, but that was very much his thing with me. And not only me, but it became sort of what I've talked about it so much, that it became part of what he's really known for. And that whole school is really emphasizes continuity of mindfulness more than anything, more than great states of concentration or anything. It's like, what did you notice when you got up from the sitting? It's as important as anything that happens in the sitting.
I'm just so much enjoying the idea of you really being there and Joseph speeding by you.
No, he said, because we didn't talk for 3 months. And then in the end, we were speaking, and he said, he took Joseph, for those of you who don't know him, is 6'3.5". So he's got very long legs. And he said he took a resolve one day to move more slowly than I was, and he couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. And I'd watch him in the end, he said to me, what did you think of 3-part walking, which is really 3 speed walking? Like first you move pretty quickly and then you slow down, then you really slow down. I said, what's 3 speed walking? I had no idea. It was really fun.
Yeah. This is getting into where we're going to move on to later on, but these are some good stuff. I'm watching our time. We're fine. The point of all that feel is that when your mind, we both of us are very good about saying the mind, not my mind, and Joseph was really really very good about that. The mind, because who does it belong to? The thoughts arise. Anyway, not for now. But I was thinking of a whole bunch. You may have noticed that my mind thinks in terms of narrative stories. I learned this in the middle of that, not in the middle of this. And there's a crucial 2 stories. Let me see if I can tell them very briefly, because we have 4 hours together, because this is a crucial one to know. Wait a minute, what was the other one I was going to tell? This one. Oh, many years ago, I was on a retreat, because it's not enough to know what's going on, but really what's really going on and what's true about it and what do I do now, which I did know on the second story and I didn't know on the first story. So I have to tell you both stories so you see the difference in the first story. Is I was on a retreat in Yucca Valley a million years ago, and trying very hard to be present and noticing. And I was on a lunch line where people were proceeding along this buffet line, helping themselves on 2 sides of the table. So here's the food laid out, and I'm walking over here, putting stuff on my plate. And I noticed on the other side is a person who hadn't been there. It was several days into the retreat. This person had now apparently just arrived, because I hadn't seen them at all. And I looked up, and the thought arose in my mind. I didn't think, the thought arose in my mind, that's not a very good looking person at all. And I really was astounded, not astounded, I'm not, but it was such a not nice thought. It was such an unkind thought, not a good looking person. I was kind of shocked by that thought. But then I thought, well, okay, there's not a public address system on my mind, so nobody else heard that. So, okay, I continue and I eat my lunch. I go sit down in the afternoon for the next sitting. And I had on that retreat, I had a zafu and a zabuton, and I had a kneeling bench in case I wanted to sit on the bench when I wasn't sitting on the zafu. And my bench was gone. I was there before lunch, it's gone. I look up, it's under a person 6 people away from me, who was the very person on whom I thought that unkind thought. And that person is sitting on my bench. And it's embarrassing to say that I spent a good part of the rest of that retreat making up stories about notes that I could put on that person's bench. Like, by the way, I'm sure you didn't know, this is my bench. da 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 da. They're sitting on the bench the whole week. And I sit down and a breath in, breath out. That's my bench that they're sitting on. Da, 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 days pass. Okay. Now then I'm thinking, all right, this person didn't have a bench. They have extra ones in the back, but okay, they have my bench. Then it's the last day of the retreat. My bench is still under that person. I think maybe they're going to go home with me. Maybe I'll write a note that says, by the way, don't put it with the cover, with the rest of the benches. My bench. Anyway, I come back from lunch and they're gone. And the bench is back where it was. I don't know who it was, what person, whatever. But I spent a better part of that whole week in a fume about the bench. Let's imagine that happened. And I realized, my bench. And I feel upset and I feel worried. And what do? I feel concerned. And really, I'm frightened. What if I'm uncomfortable here? And what if I don't know how I can make myself more comfortable? And you'll be all right, sweetheart. Take a breath. You'll be all right. You could manage just with the zafu. You'll be doing just fine. Forget about it. The bench is gone. That's who knows if it'll ever be back. Let's be with ourselves. May I be peaceful. May I be happy. May I be free of suffering. I could have saved myself the whole week if I would have thought to myself, if I would have allowed myself to think, it's like this. My bench is gone now, and I miss it, and I'm worried, and I'm frightened. May I be peaceful? May I be happy? Didn't know how to do that yet. That's going to be a key place, because the key thing is making yourself comfortable so that you can see clearly, so you can figure out what's true, what can I do. So the same story, and the important hangover is I felt chagrin about that I missed my whole retreat, stewing away at this person, and also chagrin that I thought the not nice thought about them. Many years later, I'm sitting at my computer writing, and my friend Joelle calls to tell me that her brother, who I knew was sick, had taken a turn for the worse, and it looked like the end was near. And, I know Joelle. I didn't know the brother directly, but I knew about him. And I knew Joelle's mother and this man's mother. And I knew he had children, and I was sorry. And I said all the right things. Joelle's was a very dear friend of mine. And I said all the right things, I thought. And then I hung up. And we said goodbye. I hung up. I went back to writing because I was in the middle of writing something that I thought was really quite good. And I had forgotten what my quite good idea was, that I had been writing when the phone call came. And the thought arose in my mind. I heard myself think, so inconvenient of Jack to get worse just today. And that's so not nice, and I could feel my mind wince about it. It's actually Joelle's beloved brother. I knew his mother. I knew his family. I didn't like that I thought that. So I turned off the computer and I looked out the window and I lit a candle and I said prayers for Jack and his family, and I looked around and I thought, this is what we're supposed to do, really. And so that like 40 years passed between the guy took my bench and Joelle's brother died. But in that interim, I noticed that one of the things is you come in contact with information and you feel something and you respond with kindness and compassion. That really is we're not supposed to be impervious to what goes on in the world, whether it's somebody took my zafu, was on my bench, or somebody's brother is dying. Not impervious, we're supposed to be awake to it, and awake to how we held it and how we treated it. And if it does not resonate comfortably, if it exacerbates our pain, I'm doing it wrong. I have to stop, wait a minute, and feel for Joelle, feel for myself. Joelle was one of my dearest friends. So it's not just to know it, but to feel it and to have a certain intention in the mind. Hey, or an awareness of that thought does not feel good to me. That thought, I wish, so sorry that bad time for Jack to get sick. Really. Anyway, that's probably way too long for my Sharon keeping a better time than me. Is that true, Sharon?
No, but I think it would be so helpful for you to describe practice off the cushion and to lead a period of practice off the cushion, send people off to move about, because you were so it was so important when we were writing the description.
Okay, so I'm looking at the instruction. Sylvia, 20 minutes, I thought that was, but anyway, I wasn't supposed to be talking about it all the time. We're supposed to be getting up and moving. So here I am looking at 100 or so of you. And I don't know if it's raining where you are, or whether you're on the 6th story of an apartment building, or you're out in the country somewhere. But we've been sitting for more than an hour, so it's time to really get up and move around a little bit. And Sharon and I have both described the kind of moving around where you really are moving around in an effort to precisely feel the movements in your body and the body's response to it, in order to deepen the steadiness and the concentration and awaken the awareness, which all adds up to poise. And if we were on retreat, we'd go in a hallway or outdoors. And I'd like to invite you to go in a hallway or outdoors and do walking or moving or being outside or stretching, and being aware of what's happening. Not so much what's happening, my arms are lifting, as how does that feel? And how does that feel? And how does that feel? And what thoughts come up and what feelings come up, and whether or not they're pleasant or not. If you're in the 6th story of a 6th floor of an apartment house in the middle of a city, and you have a 3-bedroom apartment, that'd be amazing if you had a 3-bedroom. Anyway, if you had an apartment with a hallway, and you could walk up and down your hallway. I have a hallway in my house. I walk up and down it 1,000,000 times a day. And I don't often look at the stuff that's hanging on the walls. Put it up a long time ago, and it's there, and I don't see it. I'm just walking, I'm going somewhere. How about walking slowly and seeing what arises? Feel your body moving and feel your mind moving. But stay there, whatever you're doing, looking, you could touch, you could feel yourself walking, you could be stretching. Stay doing what you're doing. Just when Sharon was describing a little bit before, I was remembering, thinking, you get a little bit more. Oh, now I got it. Now I got it. And it's like you see it in a new way. It's the same thing, but you see it in a new way. You see another perspective of it. And with the net result that you feel more here. Can you wake more up than up? We are waking more up than up. A lot of our up is kind of on automatic pilot. It's amazing to be able to get up and walk up and down the hallway. Maybe somebody out there doesn't, in all these 100 people that I'm looking at, can't get up and locomote. Probably you can move your hands or your arms. Do something that's eyes open and moving and paying attention to it. How long are we doing this, Sharon?
Let's say maybe 15 minutes. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Yeah.
All
Is that
right.
okay? Well, you have a
All right.
chance for a bio break, and
15
Just
minutes
keep
to
paying attention.
pay attention. I wrote a book called Pay Attention.
For goodness sake.
For goodness sake. Pay attention, for goodness sake, for the next 15 minutes.
Sylvia?
We're talking about the fact that for, I don't know, 30, 40 years, I was saying to people after an experience like a sitting or a walking, I've been in the habit of saying, how was that for you? And sometimes people say I had a really hard time or that wasn't pleasant. Mostly they don't offer that because they're feeling too disgruntled about they didn't have a good time. But it's kind of a setup, because if you lead a sitting in a sweet way and things are going well and people don't feel sick, they say, I felt great, or it was fun to be outside, it was lovely, da da da. And it's kind of a setup, because it doesn't matter if it was unpleasant or pleasant, or they went outside and they got an allergy attack from the flowers in bloom, or it doesn't, I mean, it matters to them, but it matters more that it doesn't matter in any sitting, walking or sitting or lying down. It doesn't matter if the experience is pleasant or unpleasant. I mean, it matters to the person because it's pleasant or unpleasant, but it matters in terms of practice. What did you learn from it? Because every moment of, somebody said that to me, every moment of mindfulness erases a moment of conditioning. It was Sivali who said that to me many years ago, another Burmese teacher. Every moment of mindfulness erases a moment of conditioning, means erases a moment of confusion. And I think to myself, when I think that, and I hear his voice saying that, I think to myself, I have this view that somewhere there's a great blackboard in the mind, and it's all scribbled up, and that that every moment of presence, of mindfulness, erases a moment of conditioning, then the scribble is getting erased. And that it sounds good, like I'll continually be erasing scribble, and then my mind will be clear, or the mind will be clear. And that what's also true is I'm probably also continuing to scribble with unmindful moments. So I hope that the mindful moments are outweighing the unmindful, and I'm getting ahead on the scribbling. Every moment of mindfulness erases a moment of conditioning. So the question that I more ask people is not how was that experience, but what did you learn from that experience? So see if you can, in your journal, write down a word or 2 words or a sentence of what did you learn. If you make it as an assignment and you do it, pick up a pencil or a pen, something will come out of your mind. What did I learn? What I learned was. So we're in the same category. And the grief, my experience is the abject grief goes, mutes itself. But there isn't a day that he isn't alive in my mind. My whole, you can see that I am surrounded by photos, and many of them of me and my family. But I thought to myself recently, it's probably true for you as it is for me, because in this age group, people are dying all the time. And so it is true for me. A lot of my friends are dying, and I thought, if I'm not planning to write another book, but if I did, I would write a book called People I Love Don't Die. And of course they die, but they don't die in my mind or in my heart. And I've said that to a few people that say, oh, write it. But I don't know if I'm going to write it, but I think it, because they don't die. They enliven my life now. So, and anyway, everything, we all have birthdays and we all get older. And things die. It was wonderful. By the way, uh, thank you very much, Sharon, for the idea that we might have sharing like this back and forth, because I think this is a very sweet thing to do. And I feel like I really, I have moved in a little closer to all of you because I got to look at all of you while people were talking. And I think, Sharon, that at this point, you're going to talk about the third foundation of mindfulness.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Do that.
It's the second foundation of mindfulness.
Second foundation. Sorry. Maybe
Yeah.
second and third. I don't know. I keep looking at this thing and we're halfway through. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm gonna indeed talk about the second foundation of mindfulness. We're gonna do another sitting, and then see where we're at, right at that moment. We had one plan, then we changed it while you were out moving about. And so we'll just see where it goes, Uh we may change it again, or we may go with plan B. Or this giant parade just finished walking by my apartment, and my apartment is on the second floor. So like right now there's a tourist bus outside, is a 2-story bus, and so I can like wave to people and if they happen to glance over. And for a long time I thought I would get like a giant Statue of Liberty or Buddha, for in front of my window so people could have a hit when they were going by. But I thought it was the Puerto Rican Day Parade. Maybe that's tomorrow, or maybe it's uptown. But
Isn't it the Pride Parade?
what's that?
It's not.
No, that's next week.
Okay.
This was an Indian parade with Hindu deities and people shouting Ram Ram and Hare Krishna and things like that. So I was very startled at first, and that's why I kept looking over to look at the gods and goddesses, and I felt really at home. It was really extraordinary, and it was a good introduction actually to the second foundation of mindfulness, which is in Pali, it's Vedana, and it's often translated as sensation or sometimes feeling. It is the actual Krishna parade. I had to send a text to somebody. That's what they told me. And sometimes it's translated as feeling. That's also confusing. I personally translate it as feeling tone. It doesn't mean sensation in the sense of heaviness or lightness, or it doesn't mean feeling in the sense of emotion. What it means is feeling tone of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutrality. So if you go back to the Buddha's description of the universe we experience, he said every moment of experience is known by us in one of 6 ways: is seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, or there is knowing through what he called the mind door, cognition, ideation, emotion, imagery. So it's 6 senses, not just 5. The 6th sense is not something paranormal or weird. It's knowing through the mind. And in his description of the universe we occupy, he went on to say that every moment of knowing, a sight, a sound, a sensation in your body, a feeling, an emotional feeling, whatever it is felt by us to be pleasant, painful, or neutral. It's kind of part of the package. And it's not inherent to that object, which is also interesting. Like a lot of people probably did not like the sound of that parade, and thought, this is disturbing my day of being at peace or watching Netflix or something like that, Whereas I was immediately into nostalgia. It's like, oh, it's like, being in India, how wonderful. And then there was that year in India, that experience in India. So we might have very different feeling tones associated, or even just as a human being, what if you didn't sleep all night last night? And You hear some comment, you overhear some comment, and it's galling, it's really unpleasant, or maybe you had a perfect night's rest and you hear the very same comment and it's amusing, it's different at different times. So as a human being, in terms of psychological astuteness, we do some work on that level. Why is that interpretation so prevalent in my life? And but in terms of mindfulness, the vast amount of the work happens later. So the pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutrality of an experience is tied up with it. But then what do we do? Some people think that if I get really good at meditation, there won't be any more pleasantness, or intense pleasantness, but that doesn't matter because there won't be any more intense pain. And everything will kind of dissolve into this sort of gray blob. And some people long for that. Some people dread it, but it's not what happens anyway. So that's kind of irrelevant. We feel pleasantness, we feel unpleasantness, we feel neutrality. The question really becomes, how do we relate to that? What do we do with that? And this has become an important point for me and what I try to emphasize in teaching. I don't have, I'm in New York, not in Barrie, where my house is. And I spent most of the last 30 years in Barrie. And I was teaching an enormous amount online, some of you know, and people started sending me mugs and cups that had sayings on them of things apparently I was saying over and over again. They're all up there, though. I don't have any of them here. And one of them is, something's just hurt. Something's just hurt. It's not because you have a bad attitude. It's not because you need to change your thinking. It's not because you evoked it in some way. Something's just hurt. They really hurt. And we need to forgive ourselves of that feeling and allow it and recognize it. We need to allow every feeling, every emotional feeling that comes, the dignity of its own existence. What we don't need is like extra suffering, right? The way we pile on, the way we add shame or blame to what we're feeling, the way we add a fixed future. This is the only thing I will ever feel going forward. The way we add a sense of isolation. I'm the only one who ever feels this. So many things that we just add and add and add and add and add. That's what we don't need. And so that's really where the work of mindfulness is most relevant. We feel the pain of something or the unpleasantness of it. We feel the delight of it or the pleasantness of it. We can feel the neutrality also, all those places in between, but we can be different with all of that. So certainly we can have a very distorted relationship. Let's start with pleasure. The classic example, of course, would be clinging or grasping. Oh, this feels good. I need more of it. I need to be in control of it. I need to never let that experience change. I need to never let that object break. I need to never let that person change. Right? That would be the classic example of a very strange and unfortunate relationship to joy, to pleasure. And there are others as well. We may not allow the feeling in much. We don't feel we deserve it, or there's so much suffering. And a lot of people, and people have written, starting in the Q&A, which is great if you want to write it, questions or comments in the Q&A button. A lot of people are in some way working on the front lines of suffering, either a family member or in the community or their professional life. And it's very hard, facing the suffering of others in that way and allowing yourself the rightfulness of a break or what you might need for resilience or letting in the joy. But what happens if we don't do that? We get exhausted. We burn out. We don't have the wherewithal to continue on. And so there are a lot of ways we can have a really strange relationship with happiness. I'm laughing because I was recently with some friends who I would see regularly on Maui when Ram Dass was still alive. After his stroke, he moved to Maui and kept on teaching, and many of us would go every year to support him in his annual retreat. And the first time I went, I was, it was public. It was like on my retreat schedule, so everybody knew. But I did something like I tweeted out, "Oh, I'm on Maui, and it's like unearthly beauty. It's just like they're not even words to describe how beautiful it is." And but people started writing me and saying, "Wow, can't believe you're on Maui. You're like the luckiest person on earth." And right away I would write back and say, "It's very humid here. You have no idea how humid it is here." And that became kind of a thing. And I was just with two of those people that I would see every year. So it was very much on my mind. So I think we were talking about Costa Rica, and they asked me if it was humid or something. I don't know, it was very funny. But, so subsequent to that, I talked about that in the retreat. Like, I can't let in the joy. I can't admit, yeah, I'm on Maui. Isn't that great? It is lucky. I had to diminish it in some way. Well, it's not that great, really. And it became like a theme of the retreat, because I was walking out of the pavilion, which is a meditation hall in that place. And behind me were these two people, one a friend and one the now adult child of a friend. And he was talking about his mother and saying, she really wanted to come and she really tried. She couldn't make it. It's like, she's so upset that she couldn't make it. And so then I heard my friend say to him, "Did you tell her how humid it is here?" So it really became a thing. We have often a very distorted relationship to pleasure. It's hard to take in. It's hard to appreciate. It's hard to allow to grow inside of us so that we then have some wherewithal to meet adversity. And certainly we can have a really distorted relationship to pain. We feel embarrassed by it. The whole culture in the United States, at any rate, is one of you should have been more in control. You shouldn't have allowed yourself to get old or get sick or die or be afraid and we absorb that. It's a very weird relationship to what is an element of life that is inevitable and shared. And so we confront that. And we have a strange relationship as well, often to neutrality. Those places in between, very pleasant and unpleasant. Most of us largely are not, our consciousness is not really trained towards subtlety. We need a kind of intensity to feel alive, intense pleasure or intense pain. And in those in-between places, it's like we're nowhere. We're just kind of numb or half asleep. And so almost the definition of mindfulness is the ability to be aware of what's happening in the moment with a different relationship to pleasure, pain, and neutrality than we're awfully used to. Instead of clinging or condemning or grasping or spacing out, we can be much more present and connected and aware and balanced. That's what mindfulness is. It's also true that in terms of the development of mindfulness as a skill, it does not matter if you're looking at something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, because it's all challenging in its own way. Naturally, as a human being, I'd prefer pleasure. Someone's asking for an example of neutrality. Well, anything that a breath for many people would be neutral, right? Or often with repetition, something becomes kind of neutral, like that cup of tea that everyone was admiring, like I wouldn't tell you how many cups of tea I've already had today. It was like, unless there's kind of an exquisite awareness, it's just, it's like, it's not thrilling, it's not exciting, and it's also not dreadful, it's just there. But it's much harder. Things can be slightly pleasant or slightly unpleasant. It's hard to hit like an absolute neutral. That is true. But the breath would be kind of an example. Those experiences where you tend to get a little sleepy or distant, or they're not registering much. because they're not striking you as pleasant or unpleasant. There's someone, you can also see it with kind of neutral people. You know, who are the people we encounter that we don't tend to pay much attention to. We don't really take them in a fuller way. They're playing a function in our life. So it's not like your dearly beloved friend. It's not like you're a really difficult person, which also wakes you up, you know? It's just somewhere in between. So with mindfulness, we learn to be with the pleasure in a different way, with the painful feelings in a different way, and the neutral feelings in a different way. And that's why the feeling tone, the Vedana, is very important, because it's that which we're reacting to. It's not the sound. Because one day I find that sound pleasant. If I'd never been to India, I'd never find that sound pleasant. But I did. And so what do I do with that experience of pleasure? So back to something's just hurt, you know, like we can open up to what is present in the moment in a more honest way, recognizing the feeling tone, noticing how we are with the feeling tone. Sometimes, for example, with physical pain in the body, the whole rest of our body will tighten up as though to kind of eject it or ward it off. And then we've added tension to pain. So what are the add-ons we're employing in a certain situation? What are the filters? I should have been able to stop this long ago. I've been meditating for 50 years, for God's sake. Why is this still here? And that becomes the way we relate. And it's part of our observation. I don't want to imply that it's like a harsh scrutiny. In Tibetan practice, they talk about like spy consciousness. It's just it's a subtle turning toward, well, how am I with this? Sometimes, depending on what technique of mindfulness you use, it becomes more predominant rather than other times. So, for example, one technique, and it's only one amongst many, is mental noting, where with the breath, you might quietly be silently in your mind repeating in, out, in, out. And then when something becomes predominant, not like a little dwippy thing, you know, but it's really strong and your attention's going there, and the word comes easily, you place a mental note on it, like thinking, or joy, or sorrow. It's a really interesting technique in a lot of ways. Again, it's far from the only technique. Symbolically, this is what we're doing anyway, even if you're not employing the word. And I found the word in the beginning quite awkward and then very, very useful. It was awkward because I was so fussy, you know, like I used to sit there in India and think, is this pain or is it discomfort? Is there something in between pain or discomfort? So it was like a complete waste of time. I resembled somebody sitting down and reading a thesaurus more than anything. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be that exact, you know. So it became really useful. For one thing, if you have a tendency towards sleepiness, it helps wake you up. It helps guide you back toward, oh, this is anger. It's anger. It's anger. And said, what in the world am I going to do about this? Right. And being lost in that, it's like, here it is. This is what's happening right now. And the other thing that's useful is that it's an instant feedback system. So if you hear yourself labeling thinking, that's a clue about how you feel about the fact that you're thinking, right? So that can be really useful. But again, you don't have to do it that way. Whatever way you do it, that sort of understanding like, oh, this is an unpleasant feeling, or this is a really pleasant feeling, or it's like, in between, becomes part of what we're paying attention to as we continue to practice. And whether we're practicing on the cushion, so to speak, or we're just practicing in the world, you realize, oh yeah, that feels that feels really pleasant, you know? Am I allowing that or not? And so on. So let's do another sitting together. It can be very similar to what we did before, except see if you can add some of this element, either through mental noting or just through kind of a subtle, a soft observation, a gentle observation of this is how I'm holding what is happening to me right now. Okay, so we'll sit together. Again, you can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you for that. I know we're all on different time zones, so it's a little complicated figuring it all out in terms of a schedule, but we want to have a longer period where people can eat, experience pleasure and pain, and whatever it might be. And it's a tremendous arena for observing just that. Somebody got me this gum when I was back in Barrie, and I was chewing it, and it was the most remarkable thing that it was literally 3 bites and all the flavor was gone. And it was it was amazing, you know, because the impulse is, of course, let me stuff that whole bag of gum in, because it's lost its flavor and it continues to lose its flavor. So I've got to propel myself into more and more and more. And we experience so much in that process. The key is just slowing down a little bit so you can observe, and hopefully observe with, again, presence and balance and kindness, whatever might be arising. I'm tempted to ask Sylvia, who is going to speak a little bit about the Rahula Sutta. Rahula was the Buddha's son. If you could do that for a few minutes before we send people off, because it's such a tremendous emphasis on daily activity as the very fertile ground for understanding and wisdom and so on. And then we're going to take about 20 minutes. You can have a bio break. You can move about. You can look at pleasantness, unpleasantness, and neutrality, and you can eat if it's time for you to eat.
The important thing, really, the contingent on the whole rest of it happens in the knowing that something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral has just caught our attention, because it might say somewhere in a sutta, more or less, that the untrained mind at that point might yield to the impulse of doing something not so skillful, or talking too fast, or saying too much, or telling a lie, or talking improvidently, which we'll talk about the Rahula afterwards. But in between, I think that everything, the real possibility of change, and what makes us human beings in contrast to other kinds of beings that, much like us, have the same as us, have limited growing times and maturity, and then they pass away, and they think and they like things and they don't like other things, and they become habituated to things. But I don't think, for the most part, they have the ability to not respond to impulse, and human beings have that ability. I think that's the big ability that human beings have, that can feel like doing something and not doing it. We can feel like saying to somebody, I just have to put this, get this off my chest. And I hear that, I think, no, you don't. You could not do that. Or I just have to tell you, no, you don't. You could think over, is this a good thing to tell? Because the link between the second and third foundation of mindfulness is here, this feeling arises, this is pleasant. Oh, just enjoy this. May it not pass, may it not pass, may it not pass, which sets up an imperative in the mind that it shouldn't pass, which, if we haven't said, we should said, is fundamentally what is experienced as a suffering in the body. It's not what happens, but it's the imperative that it should happen this way, not another way, or that it should happen. It really, it's imperative in the mind to be able to say, I'm very hungry, but it's not time to eat yet, so I'll wait. Or I really am furious with my colleague, my boss, my friend, my partner, to tell them off, but maybe that wouldn't be such a good idea. Maybe I should reflect. And that's what we're going to talk after lunch about, the Buddha telling his son Rahula. But what's important to say now is to watch that moment between imperative, between pleasant and imperative to have it, and unpleasant and imperative to get rid of it. Because it happens all around. I remember on lunch lines, walking down a lunch line and looking down the line and seeing all the stuff and seeing something way down at the end and thinking, oh, that's what I really like. I hope not a lot of people take it, because maybe there won't be one left for me. Maybe I could take two and put one in my pocket and have it later. And I'm just on the line. I didn't get there yet. And they have more of it in the kitchen. But the mind is always taking care of. Every time I sat down on my zafu and I saw that person with my bench, the thought arises, I'll write him a note. I'll write him a note. I'll just write him. I'll write a nice note. I'll read a really nice note. Like, I'm sure you didn't know that when you took it, da, 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 da. I didn't write any notes, and I'm very happy I didn't write any notes, and that person used a nice bench, and that I held it in, and I learned a lot from it. What I didn't learn in that moment is what I could have, had I realized I'm my mind state, I'm all in a frazzle about, why didn't he give it? What if he doesn't give it back? What if he takes it home? I'm missing my retreat, and I'm in pain with that worry. Let's just say, here's the truth. My zafu is not available. My sitting bench is not available to me. Maybe it's gone forever. Maybe it's not. Meantime, I'm not using it. Now, in, out, in, out. I could have spared myself so much agitation in that whole week. And it comes from realizing my mind is a mess, because it's completely held hostage by that stupid bench. It's completely held hostage. But they ran out of pizza before I got up on the line up to there. I'm going to eat dinner. There's lots of things to eat. I'm hardly starving. Why didn't they plan? My mind is a mess. What can I do? Is really, it's not a formal, as far as I know, it's not a formal thing to say. Anger has arisen. It's unpleasant. I wish it were gone. And when we come back in a little bit after our next time of moving and eating meditation, and we begin to study the formal wishes for well-being for ourselves and other people, and say, there are things that I can say to myself. I could have said to myself, sweetheart, you're in pain. This is unpleasant. I wish it weren't here. I really wish it wasn't here. The wishing is so unpleasant. Give up. You'll either have it back or you won't. Now, here's breath in and out and in and out. Oh my, this is much more pleasant. This is nice. I hope that person's enjoying my bench, or however it is. But that learning to noticing the flavor of the moment, and what the imperative that arises in the mind is, or what the state of the mind is. If I think to myself, oh, good, that person's got my really nice bench, and may it really support them in their practice. That feels really good for me. Then I can sit back and enjoy mine. Between the second and the third is that movement of human beings can have an impulse and not react to it. That's such a big news. It's also the liberation news of the Four Noble Truths, that things happen. We make them worse when we complicate them improvidently. We don't have to make them worse, and we can train the mind not to make them worse. And we can train the mind in specific ways to be thoughtful and wise. And we'll talk about all of that later, but important now to see that, because now we will, in fact, go and all prepare for ourselves. In how long, Sharon? How long are we preparing and eating? 15 minutes, 20 minutes? What do you think?
I think it'll have to be something like 15 minutes. But that may not be enough. So I don't want you all to be like frantic, it may turn out to be 20 and that'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
All right, if you're ready, after 15, come back and sit and look at everybody else and wish for them that they had a nice lunch or supper or brunch. The thing is, I'm going to say this, I just popped in my mind and I'll forget it by later. The Buddha is said to have said, and somebody said to me that the Buddha said, you should know when you wake up in the morning, whether you woke up on an in-breath or an out-breath, and you should know when you fall asleep at night, whether you fall asleep on an in-breath and an out-breath. And I hear, most people hear that, and they think that's ridiculous. That's when I'm the least awake and attentive, including me, think, what kind of an instruction is that? I think it's not about really you have to know when you wake up and when you fall asleep. That's not crucial to know. But it said you have to know that, and you have to know that the beginning of the day and the end of the day implies that you have to be paying attention all throughout the day, I think. That's what I think is the secret teaching of that. It's the same as the secret teaching of what's going on in the in-between times. There are no in-between times. This is it. It's called life. And we have to get through it. A retreat is a piece of cake, by and large. Life is hard. How about that for the first noble truth? Life is hard, but retreats are a piece of cake. They're not really. They're not really. They are hard. But they are also beautiful and wonderful. And I wish that you sometime in your life have a chance to really sit down with your mind quietly in that kind of a setting. In the meantime, here we are, and we're all over the world, and I like that too. I love that we can all sit down in our homes all over the world and learn to pay attention. Okay, now, everybody. So on the hour would be 17 minutes from now. Okay, on the hour, and then we'll have an hour to talk about the lunch and everything else. There you go. I have a feeling like I'm having such a good time. I hope you are having a good. If you're having a good time, let me know. If you're having it's very good. I have a friend that I teach with whose motto is avoid feedback at all costs. But that means feedback. For me, that means feedback at the end of something. Because avoid that feedback because there's no point. It's already finished. You can't fix it up retrospectively. It can just make you demoralized. But in the middle, you can certainly say to people, is this what you expected? Is this what you wanted? Are you happy? And then it gives you encouragement. So, you happy? All right, here we are. And we have just 1 hour left. And we could talk for 10 hours, of course. And here is a question that just came up for me. Clarify the third foundation. Okay, that's just about what I'm about to do. So you came to the right place. Let me tell you about the four foundations of reminding our pay attention. The whole foundation is pay attention all the time to everything. Pay attention to the body and the breath in the body. Pay attention to the arising and the changing landscape of this is pleasant, this is unpleasant, and this is neutral with every single moment that arrives. And it's usually, unless it's something big, we don't pay, it's not monumentally discernibly different. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Uh-oh, there's a book by, I always forget his name. He wrote Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in the Kindergarten. Anyway, there's a book called Uh-oh. That's the name of the book. It's a very sweet book if you if you get it. But it means that we go along, and there's something that really catches our attention because it's either very pleasant and we want more of it, or very unpleasant and we want to do away with it. Otherwise, we mostly continue on unless it's dramatic. But it's really important to notice, especially if it's dramatic, because the mind, as my friend and teacher Sharon Salzberg likes to say, the mind is poised to write editorials about that news. This is unpleasant. Uh-oh, how can I get rid of this? I'll never be able to get rid of it. It'll never go away. What a stupid thing it was for me to have this come up in my mind to begin with. We don't leave things alone. We don't say, this is unpleasant. Is there anything I can do about it? What can I do? What's going on and what can I do? What's happening and what can I do that will relieve suffering in this moment for myself and for everybody else? I would teach that one of the teachings that I really like is the teaching of the Buddha to his son Rahula. And he had a wife, presumably, according to the story, had a son Rahula, and his son Rahula is an infant when he leaves in the quintessential find yourself journey. He leaves in the middle of the night, leaves his wife, his child, goes out to discover the cause and the fact of suffering in the world, and sees old age, sickness, and death, sees also an image of a monk walking through this surprising image of old age, sickness, and death. And he realizes that that is the lot for all of us, that once we find that life is happening, there's no place else, no way out but forward. And it's I'll be old unless I don't make it to that. But if I even make it long, eventually I'll be ill. Eventually I won't live anymore. Whoa. For each of us, that kind of existential awareness is a major dimension of growing up in Eastern and Western psychology. And the Buddha said, really, that's the cause of suffering in the world, our maladaptive response to that fundamental truth. And in the story, there's a monk walking past the Buddha's vision, and the monk is serene of visage. And I don't think that means the monk is uninterested in old age, sickness, and death. I think it's meant to convey that the monk is all right with it because he understands that that's the way of being alive. That happens to everybody one way or other. And if you know that it happens, then, and if you understand that it happens to everyone, and it's what happens having found yourself in the very unlikely situation of this one very, very precious life, which is also what the Buddha called it, is one precious life. You can live it more fully if you say that's how it is. It's one precious life as me here. So the Rahula story is eventually the Buddha goes off, he figures it out, he has this enlightened experience, and he founds an order of monks, and way later, his son Rahula becomes an initiate in his order of monks. And there's a particular teaching that's called the Buddha's teaching to his son Rahula. And it goes like this. She said, before doing or saying anything, Rahula, you should reflect thus. Is what I'm about to say or do for this person's benefit and for mine as well? And if it is, go ahead and do it. And in the middle of doing an act or saying something, Rahula, you should reflect, is what I'm in the middle of doing actually for this person's benefit and also for mine? And if you discover that actually, whoa, then stop and make amends. Say, sorry, whoops, I didn't mean to say that. I'm going back. Can I make amends? But if it's yes, it's okay for everybody's benefit, then you go on. And after doing anything and or saying anything, one should reflect, is what I just did for other people's benefit or for their loss? And if it isn't, go back, fix it up, make amends, apologize, do restitution. And I love that story. When I tell it to people, they say, how can you have a life like that? If every single thing that you thought or you said, you had to scrutinize. I read, somebody sent me an email. I have to unget the emails because I think it's a good email, Dory. So send it in a minute when we take questions. Oh, I see you, Dory. Send in a minute, put up your hand first for the questions. Okay, now Monique has told you where to find them. Okay. Because there she is. People say, how could I do that? I could never go forward. I would always be, it would be like such a staccato life. Should I do that, say that. And I did it. He said, by the time you got ready to do something, you'd be doing the next thing or saying the next thing. You can't possibly live a life like that. You can't really possibly live a life like that, except if you got up in the morning and made a determination with all your heart and with all your intention and with all your power, said to yourself, when I meet anybody all day today, may, may all of my interchanges be for their benefit as well as my own. And as I deal with them, may my intention to everybody stay loving and caring all the day long. And may all of my actions reflect the compassion I would feel, something like that, as part of your morning prayers when you put yourself together to go out for the day. You were doing formal metta phrases. You would say, may all beings feel safe. May all beings feel content. May all beings feel strong. Maybe that means may all beings have enough to eat and clothing and medicines and medical care and schooling. May all beings have all of that, and really dedicated your mind to staying in that mindset. Then you could go out and do your day. That's a formal metta training where you're really making it in your mind, and then you go out and then you can be present for everybody all the day, taking care of yourself. May I take care of myself kindly and everybody else kindly. It'd be great. I have to talk fast. I'll tell this instead of the other story. I got a new dental hygienist recently. I just had my teeth cleaned. Comes in with beautiful eye makeup, really beautiful. And I said, oh, you have such beautiful eye makeup. I said, does it take you a long time to do that? She said, well, yeah, it does. She said, I live an hour north of here. I love my job. There's nothing more that I love. I love my job, and I love being able to take care of people all day long. And I live an hour north of here. So I get up at 4:30. 4:30. Nobody's going to the dentist at 4:30. I get up at 4:30 because first I get up and I have some weights and I do some exercises. And then I do some exercises. And then I meditate. And so I said, what do you do? Well, I sit and I really feel myself breathing and I feel myself present. And then I take a shower and then I get ready for the day. And then I drive an hour to go to work. And now I'm here. She said, but I have to do all this because what I love best is taking care of people. And I want to take care of myself all together so that by the time I come to work, I am all taken care of. So I'll be all together here to be available to all of my patients. I think I love her. I mean, who has a dental hygienist who gets up at 4:30 in the morning so she can put on the beautiful eye makeup so she can get there in order to be present to me and all of her patients so that she said, because that's what I really love. I really love connecting with my patients. I thought to myself, she don't have to go to any retreats or learn from the Buddha. She learned, she taught herself somehow. But that's what we have to do. We have to take care of ourselves so that we can recognize the world is full of people who need care and feel intentional about doing it so that we can feel the pleasure of connection. Good. I don't even, I remember the story I was going to tell you. This is a better story. Uh, there's one more story that can go with that. Some years ago, with my friend Martha, we were having dinner, I guess, in some restaurant. And at some point, I went to the restroom and I was getting ready to leave. I was washing my hands, looking in the mirror, as it have these sinks and then a mirror up here. And there was a woman standing next to me. And her hair was, she was just as I was watching her, she had all her hair swept up apparently on the top of her head with a big comb or two combs that held it up there. And as I was looking at her, she pulled the combs out of her hair and she shook her head like this, and the hair poofed out in a tremendously beautiful way. Do you remember Farrah Fawcett? Farrah Fawcett had tremendous, beautiful hair. And I looked at her and she had tremendous, beautiful, lot of tremendous, beautiful hair. You notice I don't have a lot of hair. I never had a lot of hair by choice because I don't have Farrah Fawcett hair. But she poofed, she did like that. And I said, oh, you have beautiful hair. And she looked at me and she said, well, if it makes you feel any happier, I'm very unhappy. And she walked out. I thought, oh, first of all, I didn't mean to hurt her feelings. And how not nice was that? Anyway, I go out and I say to my dinner companion, I say to Martha, Martha, you can't believe it. The dad tell her the whole story. And she said, that's not nice. Where is she? I'll go tell her what a nice person you are. No, 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 no. No, it happened. You're not going anywhere. I said, maybe she just had a bad day. Her partner just broke off with her. She just got fired from her job. She just broke her sobriety after 20 years. Who knows what kind of a state that she was in at this moment. She just wasn't in a good place. And then I was thinking about, before doing anything, Rahula, you should reflect, da, 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 da. So what about reflecting? I, went to wash my hands. She did that. I was really genuinely admiring of her hair. Should I have not said that? So I asked a bunch of people and they said, well, first of all, it wasn't nice of her to do that. Second of all, da, da, da. Maybe you should have, maybe you shouldn't, and you never know, and it wasn't your fault. And one person had a great answer for me. My friend John said, listen, you don't know. Maybe one of those things just happened to her and she's in a bad place. But you didn't offer it out of a bad place or anything other than admiration. Maybe she's having a bad day, but maybe 3 or 4 months from now, she'll be in front of a mirror somewhere and fixing her hair. And she'll suddenly think, a woman I didn't know at all a couple of months ago thought my hair was very pretty. And she said so spontaneously. Maybe she'll remember then, and maybe it'll pick up her day then. And I thought about that so much. Otherwise, we don't live monk lives, and we are out and we interact with people, and we do say things about, wow, you have beautiful hair. Should we never say that to a stranger? I don't think so. If my motivation, if I could be quite sure that my motivation rests in the desire to not harm and the desire to not cause ill for anyone else before or after or during or after, then probably most of the things that I spontaneously say are going to be good. And if they're not, and maybe the repercussions down the hall, you never know the repercussions of what you're going to do. The only thing I know is that I'd like my motivation always to be good. I actually think when I'm on retreat, and we don't have time to do this, but we're going to do it with the Metta Sutta right away, that my business in my own meditation and in my own practice is to make sure that I am not harboring any ill will, or that my sentiments are as purified as I could make them to be. This practice, after all, is called the purification of the heart. And the purification of the heart from judgments that I have about these kind of people and those kind of people and the other kind of people, or my ex-brother-in-law, or judgments that I still have not managed to somehow surround with a certain amount of everybody who's doing the best they can. That somehow I can go in the world and feel sure that I'm going to be kindly disposed, and that I don't have to check every single sentence that I say. We don't live those kind of lives. I'd like for, who's doing this? Where's Monique? There's Monique. Monique, can you put the Metta Sutta up online? This is a teaching of wishing well to all beings. This is my, when I travel, sorry. When I travel to teach, whether it's the downtown San Rafael Rotary Club or somewhere far away, I don't bring notes or plans with me, as you probably noticed, but I bring the Metta Sutta with me. Always have a folded copy in my, I think I know it by heart, but I like to look at it. It's the only one that I pretty much always ask people to listen to. And I'll tell you in advance of us looking. Whoops, no, I'll tell you simultaneous with you looking. Because there it is. I'd like you to imagine that you are sitting in a grove in a forest somewhere 2,700 years ago, a little more than that actually, and that the Buddha is teaching. And I'll read this to you. And I'll tell you in advance that Sharon and I always do this when we teach together with groups, because I love this. I think it's great. I think it's a piece of canon that I always return to. And I think every line of it is monumentally important. And I, for a long time, thought one certain line was the most important. I knew it, that this is really the one. And then when I ask people, as I'm going to ask you now, what's the most important line, the one that summarizes everything else, or the most important phrase? Everybody in the room picked a different phrase. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this together, and then you will find yourself in a group. with, I think, 4 or 5 other people, and with some little time, maybe 5 minutes, to discuss in the group what do you all think is the most important phrase. And then we'll come back together. Sharon and I will be in a group and you'll be in groups. But I'll read it to you. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Maybe they be honest and gentle, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety may all beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a parent protects with their life their child, their only child, just so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, free from addiction to sense desires, is not born again into this world. Okay, now you're in a group. Pick out what you think. Everybody in the group, see if there's a group consensus. Go.
I think are pretty brief in terms of a response. So I'm going to start there. One is, what was that line on grief that I quoted? It was something like, grief is love. Grief is love that doesn't have the usual place to land. So the person or the recipient or the heartfelt, cherished situation is gone, but the love is still, of course, existing. Can you spell Vedana in the Buddhist son's name? The Buddhist son's name is Rahula, Rahula. Vedana, I think it's Vedana, Vedana. Sometimes translated as sensation, sometimes as feeling. And my own personal translation is feeling tone, which I think is accurate. I may have missed the description of the name of the first foundation of mindfulness, which is usually described as mindfulness of the body. It's like mindfulness of sensation, basically. That's where sensation belongs. So when you're feeling your foot touching the ground, the idea is not to be conceptualizing or imagining or visualizing your foot touching the ground, but feeling hardness, softness, tension. And, here you don't need to struggle in any way to name the sensation. Sometimes we don't quite have the name for it, but that's where we are paying attention. I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia to clarify not only the third foundation, but the fourth foundation, if you want, or else I'll go on.
We'll see how I'll do on the third, because I see that it says fourth foundation, contemplation of, third foundation, contemplation of mind. And we specifically were talking about the awareness in the mind of unpleasant states that arise, like annoyance, that person has my bench, or that this meal is not what I like. States of the mind has mind states. Some of them are afflictive, When we feel angry, we don't feel good. When we feel delighted, we feel good. When we see a table full of wonderful food that we love, we feel happy. And really recognizing the mind state is really important because it often gives way if we are not, if the mind is untrained, to respond to that feeling in a way that doesn't work, like tell somebody off. I think that's very stupid what you just said. You might lose your job, you might lose a friendship. The ability to realize this is an unpleasant feeling I have, an unpleasant moment. Anger is arising in me, requires the addition of, let me think this over and give it some thought and realize whether I want to, what I can do about that, because it's a unwholesome mind state. The wholesome mind states are appreciation and gratitude and wonder and delight and amazement at a rainbow, amazement at a rainbow, the spectacularness of being in a life, more than being stuck in the difficulties of my life. Mind states are those that pick up the mind and keep it going and keep it balanced, and those that are afflictive mind states, anger, vengeance, contempt. Actually, one of the Eightfold Path is called wise effort, and the actual description of what is wise effort in the Eightfold Path, it's the Eightfold Path of practice, which is the fourth noble truth. Actually, we did not get up to that today in the teaching. It's such a short time. But this wise effort means not trying hard. It means a specific effort to notice in the mind when non-afflictive, when lovely mind states are present, gratitude, forgiveness, compassion, and amplify them. And when they don't exist in the mind, to cultivate them. And wise effort, on the other hand, is to notice if there are any afflictive mind states in the mind and the concomitant decision and attempt to remove them from the mind, because you don't want to have them there. So there are all kinds of mind states. All day and night, we're having mind states. I used to laugh on retreats because we'd be on retreats 4 or 5 days and we'd be bringing attention to the breath and the breath and the breath and the body all the time. And then finally, people would say, today we're going to pay attention to the arising of mind states, as if a mind state has not arisen in 5 days. And everything in the world has arisen in 5 days, including the mind state of how can I get out of here? Why am I here? And the mind state of this is the best place in the world to be. I'm so happy I'm here. And to be able to learn from all of that, that things that this is a world of constant change. And if we wait, it'll be from pleasant until unpleasant, till I'm delighted, till I gotta get out of here. And if we wait, we can make judicious choices. So now go, Sharon.
If anybody is interested in really thorough exploration of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, basically mindfulness as a quality is mindfulness, and we can come to understand its nature, but the arena or the field of mindfulness, what is changing the body or feeling tone and so on. So Joseph Goldstein wrote an enormous book. It's like a brick, and it's called Mindfulness, I think, and it's about the 4 foundations. And if you prefer not to get into that, he gave a whole series of talks, I think 73 talks or something, on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is available. You can buy it from Sounds True, or I think it's also available basically for free on this service called Dharma Seed, which somebody started many years ago in the basement of IMS, where they started recording the teachers who were there. And if you go to Dharma Seed, everything's just on a donation basis, and it's an extraordinary catalog. I had not been there in years, and I went looking for a particular thing for a friend, and there was like my own teachers, Deepa Ma, for example, when she was visiting there. It was amazing. So it's all there, and I think Joseph's series is also available there. The fourth tends to be the most difficult to understand. There's the body and feeling tone and the mind, consciousness, and then it's sort of like mind states, but in relation to one another, not just the existence of anger or the existence of joy, but the 7 factors of enlightenment, or different groupings and things like that. But the point ultimately is, like, those people in Burma were right: beware of everything. There's nothing left out.
I'm laughing because behind me is a whole pile of intensified CDs that Dharma Seed once sent me some years ago, something like 263 Dharma talks on there. And I remember telling my husband, if I predecease you, you could hear a different talk by me every day for almost a year.
It's true. Okay, so I want to try to get to at least a couple of other questions. If there's time, I mentioned mental noting as a technique among many. I would appreciate hearing a bit of others. Basically, the difference, mental noting is one. Most of the difference you might find with different techniques will have to do more with the arena than with the way of being with something you could note or not. If you don't note, it's the same relationship where you're not screaming, thinking at yourself, in effect, but you're noticing, oh, thinking. Some people use this other acronym called RAIN, R-A-I-N. It's very made popular by Tara Brach, which is another form of mindfulness with something kind of thorny, like an emotion. You recognize that that's the R, acknowledge it or accept it, then fight it and hate it. It's the A. Investigate it. Like if I were working with somebody in a retreat over days and I saw them on the first day and they had a lot of anger, I might say to them, when we see each other in 2 days, tell me 3 things you find within the anger. And one of them can be change. And maybe it's sadness, maybe it's fear, it's understanding these things are compounds and they are changing moment to moment. That's the I. And then N used to be non-identifying, instead of like seizing the anger and saying, I'm an angry person and I always will be. Tara these days tends to explain the N as nurturing, like be kind to yourself anyway, even though this is perhaps a painful feeling. So that would be another example. Mostly you would see things like, yes, Bhante Gunaratana did write a great book about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The arena is mostly it. Like there's some schools that really focus on mindfulness of the body, and that can be in a very patterned way. Like John Kabat-Zinn adapted it as the body scan. It started out in Goenka school, who was my first teacher, as sweeping. He starts at the top of your head and you just move your attention down. So you're largely paying attention to sensation. Or you could have teachers, and there are teachers who largely talk about mindfulness of the mind. And that's very much what the approach is. You're looking at your own attachment and aversion, and that's the place of letting go. So it's things like that. Sylvia, you were going to say something about that first question, the primary caretaker, and being, what is mindfulness in the presence of another? And this person is caretaker for spouse who has dementia and also a grandchild. So it's about mindfulness in the presence of another.
I think really that's, in a certain way, that's what we've been talking about all along: mindfulness in life, not mindfulness on the cushion, that can I in any situation be able to say to myself, wait a minute, this is very painful. You don't have to say this out loud. In any situation, wow, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. But I remember seeing the question has to do with a husband who's not as well as he used to be and needing to take care of a grandchild or another child at the same time. And to find yourself, it's not that helpful to just name, I'm overwhelmed, this is too much, but to say, oh, I'm really in pain. This is a painful situation. And I reflex, without even thinking about it, I say, sweetheart, you're in pain. And it stops my mind from perseverating on, I'm in so much pain, I'm never going to get out of here, never going to get out. Sweetheart, you're in pain. Take a breath. You can do this with eyes open, grandchild, partner, spouse. Sweetheart, you're in pain. You're really doing a lot. You're doing a lot. Take a breath in. This is all going to pass. You're doing great. You're doing great. Take care of yourself. Take a breath. It's all going to pass. You know that. You just have to do now. Let's do now. You'll be all right. Because otherwise the mind gets frantic. It believes its own story about I can't manage this. Yes, you can. Sweetheart, you're in pain. You're doing great. What you're doing. Taking care of these two really difficult situations at the same time. I'm happy to say, by the way, that many people say to me that they call themselves sweetheart. I love that. I love that. If that could be my contribution to the Dharma, that would be good. Sweetheart, you're in pain. Take good care of yourself. Take a breath. Things will pass. We can always say that because that's always true.
That is one of your many contributions, and it's a great one. And I like that somewhere earlier in the chat, somebody put down a quote, which is actually from my friend Shelley Tagilsky, something like, enough is a feast. And I thought, oh, that's so cool. Shelley, who's also been a Garrison Fellow. And then maybe I'll just very quickly talk about the spiritual bypassing kind of fits in this as well. The question that came in about metta and not really cherishing all beings and being angry, and which I can't quite find right now. Here it is. Despite the beautiful sentiments of the Metta Sutta, most people I know, including myself, are not cherishing all living beings at the moment. How to deal with angrier feelings toward those with whom we don't agree. Obviously, that's a very extensive question and answer, which we don't really have time for, but I think it demands many things of us. One is a real exploration of what we mean by cherishing or love or compassion, and to see if it somehow means to us giving in or being super sweet or meek or compliant, and it shouldn't really imply any of that, but it tends to for many of us. So it really takes like a strong examination. What do we mean by those feelings? And some of what really helped me was, first of all, coming to understand that metta or loving kindness or compassion is like a heart space. It's not insisting on a certain behavior or action. And that's the question people ask all the time. Like, do I, if I were to develop a more loving heart, does that mean I have to say yes? I have to let them move back in. I have to lend them more money. And I've heard a million variations of that. Do I have to visit them in jail, even though the reason they're in jail is the way they behave toward me? And the answer to all of that is no. It's not a particular behavior. We know there's such a thing as tough love. We know there's such a thing as fierce compassion. So it's not so much what we'll do, but why we tend to do things. And the traditional answer would be that the Buddha taught loving kindness is the antidote to fear. So if you are largely governed by fear in what you do and what you say and what you hold back from doing or saying, because that's kind of action, and you cultivate loving kindness, you will find you are more and more naturally, not through force or coercion, but naturally coming from a place of a sense of connection. It's not giving in and it's not demanding a certain action, but in your heart, rather than feeling so estranged and it's like wishing. I do wish this person could come out of their state. Somebody told me once they were doing loving kindness practice towards somebody with their mother, which they really wanted to do. So it was coming from them, who'd been very, very abusive when he was a child. And he said the only phrase he could use, because we use phrases in that practice, was, may you be free of hatred. And that he could do. And we genuinely do wish that toward these beings we don't agree with. So it's that separation of us and them and self and other, which is driving us all down. And it's also not true. It doesn't reflect the truth of this interconnected universe, which does not mean you like somebody, but you realize our lives have something to do with one another. And so it's a different kind of consciousness, looking more in terms of we than it's oppositional self and other, and you fight for what you believe is right nonetheless. So it's like this big examination. And sometimes there are situations, of course, I use the quote from the Buddha, later echoed, by Martin Luther King Jr. and so many leaders, where the way the Buddha said it was, hatred will never cease by hatred. Hatred will only cease by love. This is an eternal law. And I amuse myself too, when I look at a certain situation, I think, surely not here, this couldn't possibly be one of those situations, but of course I know it is. And so then I remind myself, the Buddha taught loving kindness as the antidote to fear. And is this the kind of situation where a little less fear on my part would be sort of useful? I think, well, inevitably the answer is yes. So somebody put in the chat, the therapist once said, the more connected you feel, the less certainty you need. And somebody else is saying, may we be free of hatred. May it be so. I find it helpful with someone I dislike to say, may you feel safe from fear and harm. So this is all wonderful. And I hope Sylvia and I do, come together with you all and to Garrison and do some program on loving kindness and on the sutta. And it would be a
Maybe
lovely
the
way to spend
sutta,
the day.
line by line.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you all.